A very good morning. My next video is how did enslaved Africans slash Creoles resist in the Caribbean. Last time we talked about what kinds of uprisings there were and what kinds of marinage there were. And during this video, we will talk about how did enslaved Africans slash enslaved Creoles resist in the Caribbean. It is made for Form 4 and it's about revolts and resistance. And I'll also show at the end the goals in the syllabus. This is an important word. This word I also used in my last video about marinage, and Creoles means that they were not born within the Caribbean. They were born within the Caribbean and they were not born within Africa. So we have two kinds of people living in slavery in the Caribbean. Those who were born there within a Creole culture. Actually, it's like a new created culture by the people from the different African ethnicities. And we have people still coming from Africa. They were literally enslaved Africans. And these Creoles, we have to remember this, it's a new culture, you could say, taken from different African aspects like language and their traditions and their religion, and melted into one, like a melting pot, we call it. Yes, this is an important word. Okay, insurrectionary resistance. What is insurrectionary resistance? For instance, it happened in Sao Tome. Sao Tome is an island on the coast of the west of Africa, and it belonged to the Portuguese. And here was the very first uprising. Nowadays, it's a Portuguese-speaking country with their own Creole language, if I'm not concerned, Foro, if I'm not mistaken. And back then, there, where the Portuguese discovered Africa and started trading in slaves, there was the very first resistance, very first uprising of hundreds of people who rose up against the Portuguese enslavers, you could say. Somewhat later, there was also an uprising in Hispaniola, and this is very telling. That's why I included the exclamation point, because like some 300 years later, 200 years, sorry, there was also an uprising that led to the independence of Haiti. So this was the first uprising within the Caribbean at the island of Hispaniola. And it is telling because some 270 years later, at the same island, there was an island that led to the independence of Haiti, of the western part. Yeah, and Sao Tome was the eastern part, and there was the very first slave uprising, slave rebellion within the Caribbean. So this is very special. And this shows us, we can draw the conclusion from this, that beginning in the early 16th century, I have to say it right, beginning in the early 16th century, there were already slave uprisings. So this is very telling. So the situation that slaves worked, and there was a driver who had to make the slaves work harder, and the European colonizer checked if they were doing their jobs right and punished them severely if they had to. This happened, but it was not like there was also always a master-slave dynamics that worked for the European colonizers. There were a lot of uprisings and there were a lot of instances of insurrectionary resistance, as I've said before. Well, what can we say more about rebellions and responses within the Caribbean? Well, during the 18th and beginning of the 19th century, there was less than one per year. So between 1750 and 1830, there was less than one slave uprising, slave rebellion per year within the broader Caribbean, as you see above. This is a lot. It means that once 2 years, sometimes even once a year, somewhere within the Caribbean, there was a slave uprising. And even you can say, when you look at the data, that within the 18th and 19th century, the number of slave uprisings doubled, in the different countries. So in Cuba or in Hispaniola or even on the islands of the Dutch Antilles, once a year there was a slave uprising where hundreds or even thousands of people were involved. And the colonizer had to send soldiers or use their militias to put this uprising down and to make sure that after the uprising was really put down and it had no chance of burning up again, flickering up again. So this took a lot of energy. Why did this happen in the 18th and the 19th century? Why did it double? There's one reason for that. One is that during the 18th century, there was really created the Creole culture within the Caribbean that we know today, with its language, the Creole languages, with its Creole culture, with its Creole music, and so on. And this diminished the ethnic rivalries that I talked about before in videos that created the different languages and a different culture and different ways of understanding life with the different groups of slaves within the Caribbean. So, because of the Creole culture that was created, that that grew naturally, you could say, the ethnic rivalries grew to the background, and that's why it was easier for the different ethnicities, for the different slaves coming from Africa, working together and organizing a slave revolt or a slave rebellion or a slave uprising. Because a good uprising, a good rebellion needs organization. Else you are not. Else it's harder to succeed. Yeah. Okay. What was the response of the planters, the European planters, the European colonizers? The slaves received harsher treatment at the one hand, and also this was because the idea of power by the European colonizers, the idea that they were superior was normalized. So they had gotten used to the idea that they had a flock of slaves coming from Africa or being Creole, that they had to listen to them. So the idea of superiority and all the racist ideas that belong to that had sticked in their mind, also because of the stereotypes and the racial slurs that were used. There is still another thing I have to have to name when I'm talking about why did the slave revolts double. Yeah. Also in the 18th century, you had the Enlightenment in Europe, a period where human rights and equality and freedom were very important ideas coming from France mainly, but also Western Europe broadly. And their idea was of human rights and freedom and equality. And a bit of these human rights also reached the Caribbean. And because of that, the slaves in the Caribbean, in some circumstances, got more rights and got more freedom and got more space to be free and therefore organize their slave rebellions, their slave uprisings, and sometimes even revolts. So this was also important. The slaves, like I said, were treated harsher by some of the owners and the plantation owners and the European colonizers. And the idea of that they were superior and they had power over the Creole slaves and the African slaves, it normalized. So this was also a reason, this was a reaction, a response of the white colonizers at the fact that there were more rebellions and at the fact that there were more uprisings. And they responded in this by giving more punishments, giving more whippings, locking them up in the sun from time to time, and being more unreasonable as a way of trying to instill more fear in them. Well, regarding to the syllabus, what did we do? I looked at section A, I looked at the goals, evaluated the various forms of resistance. Did they achieve their goals as slaves? Why didn't they achieve their goals? Um, was it beneficiary for the slaves to rise up, or was it not? Yeah. Why did it happen in the 18th and 19th century? What was the response of the slave owners, of the white colonizers? So you have to look at it at different sides, evaluate it. And we are talking about the content, forms of resistance of white and of female and male African slaves, and we're looking at insurrections, yeah? Insurrectionary resistance, especially. And what did I mean by this? I mean by this the following. Yeah, so evaluate means look at the pros and cons, at the advantages and the disadvantages. And with insurrectionary, I mean the following: violent actions against enslavement carried out by groups. And then we're talking about hundreds of people, or perhaps even thousands of people or more. They're violent actions, often killing people, killing their owners, killing perhaps even drivers, black African drivers working for the plantation owner. So this gave a lot of violence at the islands or lands where that happened. So I hope you found this video informative, explanatory. It was about how did enslaved Africans / Creoles resist in the Caribbean. And I also showed you guys the goal from the syllabus and also the content from the syllabus, from the amended version of 2023. I hope you found this video helpful and enlightening, and I wish you guys a very nice day.